What's up, DWA fam? This is Asia here to remind you that if you like this episode, give us a subscribe, give us a rating, give us a review, or tell a friend. We are so grateful for you guys listening, and we hope you like this episode.
Bloop. I feel like I haven't done the little bloop in a while.
No, you used to do that all the time.
I know it's been a minute.
It's been a minute. Hello and welcome back to Done with Adulting podcast. We're almost to the end of the year. I mean, we are very, very close.
It'll be a blessing to make it through 2020. So we have a week and some change left. So
crazy. I feel like we sneezed and the year was over.
I feel like the year is kind of slow.
Really? I feel like, you know those memes where it's like January, February, and then it says like March, COVID, and then it's like December. That's what I feel like. Like I strongly identify with those memes.
There's like a lot of things that happened in the beginning of the year that seemed like it was so long ago, but it still was in 2020. I think that's why I think this year is going slow. But I also do think it is flying by because ever since March, I feel like it's been super quick.
There are things that happened in September that I feel like were literally 5 years ago. I'm like, oh, that was less than 3 months ago. But okay. I'm super excited because this is actually mixed feelings. Excited for the guests that we have. Sad because this is our last and final week of our 6-week guest marathon that we've been just having so much fun doing.
Yeah, we had a lot of great people over the few weeks, and we have another great one today. So I think it's going to be dope.
I'm so excited. So one thing that you and I have been talking about, and it's so funny because I feel like we've wanted to talk about this topic for a while because it's like such an adulting thing that we all go through.
Especially in 2020, if you think about it.
Especially in 2020. But we just never, like, I feel like you and I would go back and forth of being like, how can we talk about this in a way that's like interesting and not like we're sobbing
emotional
time. Yeah. Not that it's bad that it's emotional, but like, you know, we obviously am not trying to be on here like
sappy and
sobbing.
Crying.
Yeah. So which can happen with this topic. So what we want to talk about today is really just like grief in general. How we
grief, loss, mourning.
Yeah, grief, loss, mourning, how we manage that. And I feel like especially in 2020, so many people have lost someone, or everybody at least knows somebody that has lost someone. And I feel like there's this other idea of grief of like just not being able to see people, especially for the holidays. It's like we didn't necessarily physically lose them, but maybe you haven't seen someone that's really important to you in
like the whole year.
Yeah. And like, I feel like that is a grief process as well that I want to talk about. So
that's actually a good point. I didn't think of it like that.
Yeah. I think that people are going through that right now, and just like the grief of not being able to normally like travel home or like.
Yeah. Especially like you said, the holiday season is a tough time, even for people who like, even if we were in normal times, if people lost people and they're not able to spend those holidays with them anymore. But like you said, now we're in quarantine and we're not really supposed to be traveling. So that is another aspect of it.
And I think you're right. This has always been a thing, like, especially with the holidays, we always associate it with like happy Christmas music. But at the same time, the flip side of that is I feel like a lot of people's grief really comes to the surface around the holidays just because of memories and like things that you're thinking of and seeing family. And so I just think it's the perfect time to talk about it. And we have the best guest ever who we met, another podcast accelerator classmate. So shout out to A30.
Alumni.
Yeah. But no, we are so excited to have Chelsea London Lloyd here. She is a comedian and the host of Dying of Laughter podcast, which we are going to get into. We are so excited to have you on the podcast today, Chelsea. For the listeners, we have had a serious struggle getting this production going, but we are here and ready to go. How are you?
I just feel like I'm so bad at like not acknowledging reality. Just for fun times, readers, listeners, who are you, viewers? Audio struggle is real. And we've both been doing interviews all year, and this has never happened to either of us. So it was very bizarre.
Crazy.
We're here though. We've made it.
Are we channeling the dead? What's happening?
I hope not. I don't know.
I love that for us, though. Okay, so Chelsea,
our dads are like, "What are you doing? Like, we're here."
Pull it together. No, I said to you guys, usually I sage my space before I start, and I was in a rush, so I didn't do that today, and I feel like it's showing up.
You jinxed us.
I did. But no, we would love to just hear a little bit more about you, who you are. When we're not in Corona land, you're an actress and comedian, and you also have your podcast, Dying of Laughter. So just tell us a little bit more about you and your profession and sort of like how you started your podcast.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so glad we met in the 8:30 program. And yeah, I love that we'll have online friends this year. Like, what's happening? Are you tall? We don't know.
Yeah. We don't know. I love that. You pointed that out.
How tall are you guys?
5'10".
I don't like, the first time I said it, Asia gave me a crazy look. Like I'm not 5'11", but now next time I see her, we're going to measure each other's height, but I am 5'11".
I mean, you could be 5'11". I just know that I'm 5'10", and I feel like I look you directly in the eye, if not a little taller.
No.
Okay.
How tall are you, though? Because from like online, you look tall.
You look tall.
That is so interesting. I do.
Yes.
Who would have thought?
To me, you look super tall. I look like 6'1".
Oh my gosh, this is so interesting. Yeah, no, I'm 5'5.5", and I've always been told like, wow, you are like, who cares? I'm like, I've always been told this about my height, and everyone listening is like, I don't know you or care how tall you are, but people do think I'm tall and I'm 5'5", so that's interesting.
I don't know. Maybe it's the long hair. Not that that makes any sense, but it could.
Yeah, honestly, our people's like proportions or their leg lengths and hair actually does make a difference in their perceived height. It's interesting.
Yeah, I feel like you have long legs.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's kind of weird. You just
random.
like you have long legs, so I think of height.
Everyone listening like clicked another podcast. They're like, all that I get to find out is her height, and like, what a waste. Okay. Well, yeah, in normal times, yeah, I'm from the Bay Area. I went to USC for school, and I'm an actor and comedian, and I hosted a pop culture show for a year. I've done Barry. Last year I did like a big KFC commercial. That was really cool. And
oh, that's dope.
Yeah, thank you. It was, anyways, those are all 1 hour stories, but this year, you know, not doing stand-up anymore, of course. I will be resuming once it's live, but really threw myself into the podcast Dying of Laughter, which was started based on my experience of my parents both being diagnosed with ALS and breast cancer when I was in 3rd grade. And my dad was paralyzed for most of my life. So that really inspired me to be more open about the concepts of death, dying, diagnosis, because it was so awkward for me. And oftentimes people didn't ask me questions, or if they did, they were taboo or weird, or, you know, kids are always, it's always a fun time. People would ask me like, what was wrong with him? So I was just really inspired to talk more openly. He died when I was 19, freshman in college, which I know that your dad.
Same girl, same.
Same girl. Were you a freshman in college as well?
I was actually a sophomore, and I had just turned 19 the week before my dad passed away. Literally, like we were having Chinese food in his house for my birthday 7 days prior. So I had just turned 19. I was a fresh 19, but I was also, another caveat is I was in the wrong grade basically my whole life. Like I was in a grade ahead.
What?
So I should have been a freshman, but I was actually a sophomore.
Wait, so did you skip a grade originally?
No, I just started in Montessori school, and they really just don't give a fuck about how old you are or really any work that you do. The whole idea of Montessori is like the kids get to decide sort of like what they want to do.
I feel like that's a Massachusetts thing.
Yeah, it's a Montessori school. It's like a framework of schooling where it's not like you have class every day and you have like all these different times that you have to do things. It's like you have sort of like your goals for the day and like all the things you have to get done, but the student can choose like at what point in the day you want to do them. And as long as you get everything done, then it's like, that's how it's supposed to be, like self-led education.
Yeah. Give you some freedom, it sounds like.
So they don't have as many rules around age as like a public school system might have. Plus it's you pay to go there. So it's like my mom put me into preschool when I was 2, and then I just kept going and going and going. And when I switched to 7th grade, they were like, you're 11. You're supposed to be 13. And I was like, And my mom was like, well, she's not doing those grades over because blah, blah, blah. And anyways, that is how I ended up in the wrong grade. But that was a tangent. Point is, I should have been a freshman, but I was actually a sophomore.
That's interesting that he died around your birthday. My dad also died around my birthday. What is that with like dates? And it always happens in a weird way like that, I feel like.
Yes. That's so interesting though. Okay, weird. I feel like we have soul connection. Okay, go ahead. So your dad unfortunately lost your dad. I'm really sorry to hear that, of course, for anybody who loses anybody. But yeah, so and then you have also a similar terminal illness experience with your mom.
Yes. And then thank you again. I'm sorry about your dad too. And I'm glad that we can talk about it. And it's just, so yeah, I'm excited to have you guys on my podcast at some point, and then we can talk more about your journey. So let's connect all of our journeys. Yeah. And then so 4 years ago, my mom's breast cancer returned after 17 years, and it's stage 4 metastatic, which means she will live with it for the rest of her life, however long that may be. So she will never not have it. And it's very different for everyone. She fortunately feels really great and has had, very little pain, which is amazing. But she's also at the doctor almost every week. So I don't really know how to explain it. It's like such a big deal, but also it could be worse. And so because of that experience, I was like, hey, second parent with a terminal illness, I feel compelled to speak more openly about it, and hence the podcast was born. So here we are.
I love that.
Going back to the beginning, like what you said, you were 3 when I guess they both were diagnosed. At what age did you actually?
I was 8, actually.
Oh, 8. Sorry.
You
were 8. Oh, yeah, 3rd grade. What age did you actually know what was actually going on, and did you actually like understand it?
Good point. I think I understood it right away in the way that a 3rd grader can. So I did not understand that they both were so likely to not be alive, for lack of better language. Specifically, my dad's illness, which is fatal. Breast cancer, fortunately, is very, very resolvable, more than it was then. Nowadays, especially if you catch stage 1 or 2, it's very resolvable. My mom's at the time was 2-3, which is, not as great, but I didn't know the details like that. Right. I think what I really understood was that my mom was bald and my dad was in a wheelchair, and that was weird more than anything else.
Not the norms. Yeah.
Right. Not the norms.
That's interesting because I feel like too, and I'm kind of feel like I'm going through this, and definitely my younger brother's going through this because he was like 11 when our dad passed away. I feel like, and if you could like touch on this a little, that would be great. But it's so strange to me how long-term the grief process is. It's not like strange, and it's like, duh, obviously, if you lose someone important to you, it's going to affect you your whole life. But it's not until you're actually going through different life phases. Like when my dad first passed away, like the first 2 years were basically hell. Like the rest of my college career, just because I was playing basketball, and I literally went to a school near his house because he was sick and I wanted him to see his basketball games. Like I sort of formed my whole life around that relationship. Wow. So those first 2 years were like terrible. And then like, it was fine. Whatever, normal life, getting through day to day. And now as I'm like entering these other phases of life, like marriage and home buying,
big events.
Yeah, all this adulting shit. Those are the moments where I'm like feeling like so like almost like I'm back to phase 1, kind of. Not phase 1, but it feels so similar and like fresh. Whereas like years 5 and 6 were like, okay, I'm living with this. And now years like 8 is like, what the fuck? Like, I feel like I'm going backwards, kind of. I don't know if that's a thing that other people experience.
I feel like that might like continue to happen as you have major events in your life. Like once you actually get that house, once you have kids, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely that resonates. And, they say it takes 1 to 3 years to the point where you're not over it, because you'll never be over it, as you know, but 1 to 3 years till you're at the point where you're not thinking about it constantly, every single day. Yeah. Like every single day. The first 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on who you are in your relationship, that is the first thing that you think of when you wake up, more or less. And then after that point, like you said, you resume normalcy and you kind of reach this plateau of, oh, you know, I am going to be okay, and you're ready to move forward. Again, this can look different for everyone, but like you're saying, these big events are certainly trigger points. Not everyone likes the word triggers, but just opportunities to revisit your grief. And also there's certain thresholds, like when you reach the age of the person who died, when a friend of yours has a parent at a certain age or reach a certain milestone that reminds you of your person. So I think more and more people are understanding this is a lifelong grieving process. You know, back in the day, they thought like the first psychological report said that it took 2 weeks to grieve the loss of someone. So that's just hilarious, because what does that even mean? I'm still like grieving the loss of like petty shit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's going to be with us a long time. And there's a new book called The After Grief by Hope Edelman, who also wrote Motherless Daughters, which is a book that I've gifted many people. And I actually just interviewed her for my podcast, which was really powerful. Cool. I just read the book, and it literally is about how we grieve for the rest of our lives. And it's empowering. It's not in a stressful, like, oh, this is forever way, but just acknowledging that it's okay to have breakdowns 10, 20, 30 years later, as long as they're not every day. Then please seek help. You're going through some shit.
So as a grief counselor, you mentioned that earlier, that I guess you volunteer sometimes. In your experience, have you seen people who, I guess, once they lose somebody, they don't grieve right away, and it might come to them at a later time?
Yes. A lot of people, there's deflection and lack of acknowledgement, and some people mask it with humor in a positive way, but some people that just don't acknowledge it at all, I think, are the ones that are going to have some effects later in life. And that's based on my own experience. Like, I wasn't going to grief counseling. Like, when my dad died, I didn't even think that was a thing. And I just, like, I'm so outspoken now, but I didn't used to be about all of this. And it was really when my mom's diagnosis came 5.5 years later that all of this stuff was reopened. So I really encourage and suggest people start some kind of either grief counseling, therapy, or peer-led discussion, or even just if you're just talking about it to one friend, that totally counts. Just because if you don't address it, it will be a wound that is reopened at another time when you're least expecting it. And that's not just for grief, that's for other stuff too, you know?
Anything in life. Yeah, so my dad, he passed away this September, actually. And I feel like I haven't went through that grieving process.
Really?
Yeah. I feel like I haven't went through that grieving process yet. Like, I didn't cry. I don't know. I just had to handle business that needed to be handled, and then it was like back to regular life. So I feel like eventually. I mean, I think about him every now and then, things like that. Like you said, maybe daily, but I don't know. I don't think I've really hit that grieving process yet, or if I even will hit it. I don't know.
Okay, well, Jared, this is okay. That's it. This conversation should really be about you right now.
Yes.
So
no, it shouldn't be. Not at all.
Jared, well, I'm so sorry. That's very, very recent. So, I mean, how are you feeling? I'm so sorry. That's really, really
no. And
I'm fine.
I'm glad you shared that, Jared, because this is like real vulnerability moment. But I feel like even with Jared and I, right, like we're very close friends. We were before the podcast, and we've talked about this on the podcast 1,000 times. We literally talked about it with Jared's wife last week. But Jared, externally facing, is a very private person. And so even when this happened in his life, like even as being a friend and somebody who can identify with, you know, Dead Parents Club, as I call it, it was like, you still don't know. And maybe this is a good transition question, but like, how, even when you know somebody, like I know Jared might be going through that, but like you still, and I went through that, you still don't necessarily know how to show up for that person, I guess. And I feel like I'm so glad he brought it up on this podcast, because I wasn't going to obviously make you share that, Jared, but I actually wasn't sure if he would, because I know he can be so private. And so I want to respect that, but I also know I can be helpful, but I don't want to be like pushy helpful, because not everybody needs
like overstepping.
That. Yeah. I don't know.
I think like I'm one of those people who don't need it. Like, I think I'm fine. But I don't know. Like, I guess it could hit me at a certain time. Like, I don't know.
Do you mind me asking, like, do you mind me asking how he died?
Yeah, so this might be another reason. So he had kidney disease and he's been on dialysis for like years. So I've always seen it, like every time I've seen him, like he has to go to dialysis 3 times a week. So there's times when I've seen him like super weak, blah, blah, blah. And there's times that I've run, like back in the past, I would run through the scenario of him passing away in my mind. And I feel like that's kind of like a coping mechanism for me so that when it actually happens, I won't need to go through that mourning or grieving process. But that also could be kind of detrimental to me if I'm just like always thinking about the people close to me dying. So when they actually do die, I don't have to grieve or mourn.
Okay, I do that
weird,
too,
right?
Jared. I do that now. I didn't do it before my dad passed away or like the other people that I've lost recently, like my grandmother or my cousin. But ever since like the past 5 years, I do that now. And I feel like, and I don't know if that's a problem, if that's if I should get some help for that or if it's normal.
Yeah, like exactly. Like it's kind of morbid and like, yeah, should we get help for that or is that normal? Like, I don't know.
Oh my god.
Chelsea, help us.
Oh my god, I can't believe I'm just finding this out in this interview. Well, I think this is really
we're going deep. We're going deep.
This is
just bombard you with all of our
Here, take
lives.
all of our grief, Chelsea.
Wait, are you drinking wine in the middle of the day? Because
I am.
Yes.
And you're in California, so it's probably like 10 o'clock.
It's like 10 a.m. for you.
This is amazing. This is an amazing interview. This is like, we've been through so much together already. I love that for us.
We've made it through. We're prospering, so.
Okay. Well, Jared, that was so recent. I'm so sorry. And I'm glad to see how you're reacting. I mean, you know, you have this positive reaction that seems to be like, okay, you're coping, but I just want to acknowledge, some people really do adjust a lot quicker than others. So that's very valid. And I can think of some people specifically who I've worked with or talked to that do have, you know, that story. And, you know, everyone's different. So you can be proud of that. And I'm so happy to hear that. And like, I just hope, you know, if at some point you do feel like you want to explore some kind of grief experience, I don't think that's weak. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Even if you went just for a few weeks to see how you felt, and maybe you're like, no, I actually am good. I do think it comes up later. But yours is so recent. I think you're in a different category with it's like still processing and shocking. And I'm sorry because that was recent. So I am very sorry.
No need to apologize.
Well, I'm going to. How's your family doing?
Oh, I mean, they're good. I mean, like, I feel like we're all the same. Like, we got through it. We had to handle some business here and there, but close it out and moving on with life. So, and maybe that's going into another question. So, like I said, he had kidney disease, was on dialysis. I kind of like prepped myself for it. Do you think grief is different for people in yourself? Like obviously you had family member or your parents who've had diseases that ended up taking their life, or your dad, but you lived with that for a while. Do you think people who lose somebody with a disease that they know is eventually going to kill them versus like a sudden death, like their grieving process is different or their mourning process is different, or do you think it's similar?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I actually think about that a lot. And I think the grieving process is, it's like a Venn diagram, right? So there's some really, really big and obvious differences in terms of the initial shock and processing, but there is the, you know, that section in the middle where there is a lot of overlap. And I think the deepest roots of grief are intersected and are similar, but then you have these big circles to the sides of these very different things. Whereas like the best example I can think of is, you know, when your loved one is diagnosed with something, getting the news of the diagnosis is a huge, huge part of your grief journey, is that first moment, which could be months, years, etc., before the loss. Whereas people,
your mind is probably going all over the place when you first hear that.
Yes. Whereas when you lose someone suddenly, for whatever reason that may be, accident, suicide, homicide, etc., the first time your mind is racing with the news is the moment of their death. Like that is very, very challenging. That is very difficult. I think, although I have not experienced the sudden loss specifically from all the people I've spoken with, I think initially that is very, very, very challenging. I don't want to say more challenging. And yet when you have someone who has, when a loved one has a diagnosis, I think it is more challenging to live with them when they're alive. So you're losing quality of their life, and the time that you spent with them is not necessarily the way that you had hoped. And that is very, very challenging. So there's something more challenging about each, and yet it is still going to be different for everyone. But that is my observation.
Yeah, I think like for me in my situation, my dad was sick for several years, but because I was so young, like I wasn't getting the full story. There was also just so many other factors happening in my personal life with my parents. Like they were separated and he was sick. So there was like so much happening at the same time. And so now I find myself like when I think about the stages of grief or like that type of work, I think that like I'm regressing back to like anger phase, specifically because number one, the disease that my dad had, only 3% of people die from. And I like think about that all the time. So that's the first thing. And then also it's like, I now feel like not robbed, but I feel like I didn't have all the information. And if I had had all the information, I would have acted differently than I was acting. Now, I was also 18 years old. Like I was basically just acting like an 18-year-old, like not like I wish that I was not taking so many moments for granted and like having my little attitude or like whatever I was doing. Do you know what I mean?
But like you said, you didn't know. But
I know.
Point of that,
but I think
he probably did that so you wouldn't try to like he didn't tell you all the information. So in a way to protect you, I guess.
Yeah, but now I feel
it kind of affects you.
Pissed about it.
Nah, I get you.
Like I feel internally pissed, and I'm just like, I don't want to feel pissed. Like at the end of the day, even if I knew all the information, I couldn't change anything. But I don't know. It's just weird. The other thing I was going to ask you, Chelsea, too, is
I have so many more questions for both of you.
I know.
But please continue. But I just want you to know I have a lot of thoughts.
I know you do. But my specific question for you is this. Well, if you don't mind me asking, are you single right now?
Oh, you can totally ask. No, I'm not. I've been in a relationship for 5 years.
Okay, great. So my question is this. Like when my dad first passed away, I went through this very toxic self-sabotaging phase where I could not date anybody that didn't meet my dad. And the person that was at the time was not the person for me. And now in my current marriage, it's not something that is like bringing like tension at all. It's really just like me being like, even though I feel open and able to express how I feel about my dad, I don't always feel like received because I'm like, well, you didn't really know him, so like you don't get it. Do you feel that at all? And like with Jared, I don't know if like I know Jared's wife knew his dad, and so like I don't even know if you're at that phase yet, Jared, where you're going through that, but it's kind of like that same similar thing where it's like it's hard to identify with someone who hasn't lost a parent. Like I feel that with my husband, but also I feel like you also didn't know him at all, and that's like a sad thing. Is that something you went through or go through, and what types of communication helped you get through that?
Okay, this is a good point. So yes, I think that's very relatable, and it's very, for lack of better words, frustrating. You can feel cheated. You can feel not received, like you said. Yes, because when I first met my boyfriend 5 years ago, my dad had been already dead for several years, so he did not meet him either, and that is something that does come up that I find very frustrating. I think I've found a circle of people over the last few years that I feel like I can really open up about my dad, and I think it's an interesting place for a partner to be, right? Because on the one hand, I do think that's something for our partners to all work on, because it's a permanent part of our life and thus their life, to to become more open to receiving that kind of information, which isn't easy to do. So kudos to them. And I think there's something to be said about seeking out a person or people or group of people that you can speak to about your dad. And you know, I'll plug a few recommendations while I'm here if anyone listening. Our House is an organization based in California, but they do have virtual groups now as well, which is grief groups for people who've lost someone between 1, I should say, and 5 years. So you can meet with other people your age, and there's one specific to spouse, parent, sibling, child. And I think having that support group, even for as little as 6 weeks, could make lifelong connections and really provide a lot of healing. There's also an organization called the Dinner Party, which hosts free virtual grief groups. I actually host one. There's dozens, there's tons at this point, and it's literally people in their 20s and 30s coming together. You can choose a group that's weekly, monthly, or quarterly. Mine's every other month, so it's just here and there. We pop in for 2 hours. We all talk about our dead parents. They did not all die the same way. I literally had no idea how healing that would be for me. I didn't know I needed that. I think everyone could benefit from that experience, even if you just went a few times, because there are things that no matter how hard we try, our partners will not be capable of understanding until they go through it themselves. And thank you for offering that you felt that way. I think a lot of others do too.
Yeah.
So in regards to those like sessions, other than just speaking about your lost one, what else do you guys do in that group to help people cope? Are you able to disclose that information, or is it like a private type of thing?
Yeah, no, it can be, I'm not going to, I'm like, well, Sally Jensen, who's 23, her dad did but, well, before COVID, it was interesting. They were in person. So they were, dinner parties specifically when you go to someone's house and you would share food. So it was more of a casual group in that way. Now that they're virtual, you know, I think the good part about these is this is a little bit less formal than formal grief counseling, right? So you go around, you talk about the person that died, but it's also it's just less structured. So some of them might be like each person share equally. Some of them is just kind of popcorn style. So if this week you feel like sharing more, you can. If next time you just want to listen, you can. And also, I'll just speak for mine. Like, we talk about the uplifting, funny, or awkward or comedic elements surrounding death. You know, that's just like my specific way of coping. But also something I do is I ask people about their person, like, what did he or she like to do? Like, what was their favorite food? I think a lot of grief groups are focused on trauma and the negativity and like how dark the diagnosis was. And that's important. But I'm also like, hey, like, let's talk about the lighter things. Like, what's something really funny that happened? And like one girl say, you know, it's fine to say because I won't say who. She was like, yeah, at my mom's funeral, my grandma and I were staring at my mom in the coffin, and she was like, hey, what do you want for Christmas? And she was like, Grandma, what? And she's like, I got you something early, and like slipped her a 50, like while they were looking at you know, her mom and her daughter. And it's like, it's not funny, but it's funny because that's life, you know?
So that was one of my actually questions I was going to ask you a little later, but you touched on it now. So for you specifically, you attack grief in like a comedy type of style. Do you always do that with, I guess, people who you're counseling? And do you think that some people could take offense to that?
Good question. I think that it is a specific style that is very much going to resonate with someone and very much not resonate with somebody else. And that's specific to who they are, also how that person died and where they are at and how many years later it is. You know, I think comedy equals tragedy plus time. Not, I think that's a saying. So the comedic elements often come, you know, years later. Like, I don't know if someone died last week, that's not funny. Let's not joke about it yet. Right. I think the people that you know, gravitate towards me, like they see it in my bio on my website and what I'm offering, like by the time they come to me, they're interested in that, right? Yeah. I think if you weren't, you wouldn't come. So I think what can be offensive about all of this is if you're making fun of someone else's grief story, which of course I would never do. There are comedians out there that can push lines and boundaries and just kind of make things awkward and inappropriate. When I'm doing comedy and I talk about my dad and paralysis, I'm making fun of things specific to him. I'm not making fun of other disabled people. I'm not making fun of other groups that I'm not a part of. That is a rule in comedy that is generally accepted with some exceptions. I think you can speak to the groups that you're in. So I make fun of women, I make fun of Jewish people, and I make fun of people who have lost someone, but I wouldn't make fun of another group that I'm not a part of because I can't speak to it, and therefore that's not my place and that's not funny. There are some experts and fancy pants comedians that totally do.
Cross the line.
I don't, right?
Yeah.
Why would I?
So in your stand-up, you specifically tell jokes about like when your dad was alive. That's so interesting. In like his disability specifically. And is that like now just something that's normal to you, or is that something that's therapeutic every time you get up there to do your set? If that makes sense. Does that question make sense?
It's a good point. It's weird because I'm also in a different like category than a lot of people in that I am speaking as of the past few years so openly and oftenly about grief. It's become this other thing, right? So a lot of people don't just like talk about it all the time. I'm now at the point where it's like my favorite color is blue, my dad is dead, right? And that's really healing as well as problematic because I don't actually process every single time. Like right now, I'm not going to cry about my dad because I talk about him in my podcast all the time. That's healing for me. But at what point do you need to actually acknowledge the bigger issue? Right. So that's just kind of me. But
how does your mom feel about that? If you don't mind me asking.
Great question, Jared.
I mean, it just popped in my mind. I'm like, yeah.
Totally. Okay, I'm going to answer that, but just really quick to go back. Every time I go up on stage, it's not therapeutic telling the joke, but it's therapeutic in how it is received, right? So like I have a script, I know the punchline, I know how it's going to more or less land. And yet if someone comes up to me after, is like, oh my God, like my dad also died of this. And if they've never really been exposed to that kind of humor, that's the healing part. And then to answer your question, Jared, yeah, no, my mom, it's been a journey. I mean, she, poor thing, has seen me become more and more open over the years. And at first it was very awkward. You know, I'm not from a conservative family by any means, so I can't even imagine if you're starting from that point. You know, I'm from a liberal family from California, and yet my mom is still 65 and, you know, she's not an actor. I don't come from an entertainment family. So me being open about death and dying in a podcast, in stand-up, was very bizarre for her. I also talk about like vaginal shit and like pelvic floor issues. She's like, what the fuck? But I do it in a way that works for me. So I'll just go with that.
Literally 2020 started off. First of all, we've lost a lot of people in 2020 in general. And people have lost people. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people have died from coronavirus. Also, though, like not related to coronavirus, a lot of celebrity deaths, I feel like, more so than normal. Thinking specifically of Kobe Bryant, which was how we started the year, and his daughter. And this is also kind of a half question for Jared if he's willing to answer it. But I feel like the death of Kobe Bryant for so many people was so profound, still is. And for me personally, it was the death of his daughter that was more profound for me, because I didn't necessarily think of Kobe in sort of like that way. But my point is, why do we grieve celebrities, or why do you think we grieve celebrities and people we don't know? I remember Jared specifically, like Kobe is his favorite basketball player, and like he was like
favorite athlete.
And this is
like
this is
why idol.
This is why I think it's a weird question, Jared, if you're willing to speak to it, and then like whoever wants to answer first, because now I'm rambling. But I feel like from an external perspective, I saw more emotion from Jared when we were talking about Kobe Bryant versus the more recent death he has gone through. But we haven't really talked about your dad that much. So maybe I just haven't cracked that wall. But you were real tore up about Kobe. And I feel like with your dad, you just bounced back.
Wait, I was actually going to say that. I feel like Kobe's death actually did. Like, I definitely mourn his death more than my dad's, at least to this moment, to this day, right now, this time. It was, number one, it was sudden. For my dad, I knew, like, there were times months before September where I thought he was gone or he was about to die. So, like, I was actually on the phone with him and he's like telling me all the stuff where everything is at, and I was like, oh well, if I wake up tomorrow, like, he's not going to be here. So I would, like I said earlier, I kind of prepped myself for his death already, which, like I said, I thought was weird. But then, Asia, you said you do that sometimes too, so it might be a little bit normal. But for Kobe, like, he literally just retired. He literally was about to get inducted into the Hall of Fame. Growing up, I loved Kobe my whole life. I'm from, like, right outside of Philadelphia, and I remember the Lakers playing the Sixers in the finals, and I'm walking through Philly with a Lakers jersey on, Kobe Bryant's name on my back. So for me, it was more of just like the sudden death, and then you add in that his daughter died with him. So that definitely hit me a little bit harder. And honestly, I don't know why. So to Asia's point, and I know you talked about this on your podcast, you talked about Kobe and how people actually mourn celebrities. Before Kobe passed, I always thought it was weird that individuals would mourn and cry over people they'd never met or never had a personal connection with. And then Kobe died, and I was actually in that situation, and I understood it. So yeah, that was actually going to be one of my questions to you, but yeah, Asia hit it on the head already.
We're on the same page. We're on the same page.
We're on the same page. Besides,
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, besides our Wi-Fi that was like giving
all
us
over
help.
the place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is so interesting. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. So, since I'm not a therapist, I would actually love like a psychological perspective on this. But from my observations, something that comes to mind is when we lose a celebrity, we are mourning the loss of positive memories from our childhood. And the trauma and the grief that comes from losing someone is often so painful because of the positive memories and the associations that we have with childhood. So if there is a loss that we're mourning a little bit later in life, or like you're saying, anticipatory grief, which I can relate to, of having my dad sick for a long time, there is some of the mourning process that occurs prematurely that again will come up later. And I think there's a like definitely a journey for you there. And of course, it manifests differently in everyone. It doesn't mean just because one person mourned this way, you will or won't. But it could be perhaps because Kobe was associated with such positive childhood memories. And when we're children, that joy and that hope and that fandom and that excitement surrounding memories and our passions is so pure. It's so innocent, and it's very, very vulnerable. And
a
when
lot of championships.
Yes. Tell me more. Yes. 100%. And when pieces of our vulnerability are shattered or, they change, I think that's really, really painful and can elicit this deep emotion. So I don't know. That's what comes to mind.
For you and the situation that you're currently going through with your mom, can you give advice to people? Because now there's so many people in a situation where maybe they have a family member who has COVID or some other terminal illness that if they get COVID could really fuck some shit up. And so like, can you give some advice to somebody who might be either living with a parent or a close friend or a very close family member that has been diagnosed with a terminal illness? And how do you live with that on a daily basis and like be a support system for your mom while also staying mentally sane yourself? And how do you manage that? And how maybe can you give some advice to others who are trying to manage that?
Yes. Oh man, it is a lot. So the first thing I'll say is, I'm just so sorry, and I just want to acknowledge, what people are going through. It's very frustrating, it's difficult, it's painful, all of these things, depending on what illness and how long they've had it and all of this stuff. I would remind people that getting that news is, that's one of the hardest parts about it. So if you've already gotten the news, those first few days, weeks, and even months after, it really, really is tough. And it does get a little bit easier. It doesn't get necessarily better because illnesses are, they're hard. But I remember being just livid. I mean, I was so depressed when my mom was diagnosed, and that was almost 4 years ago now. So the way that I'm speaking now, was not the way I was speaking then. I was beside myself, especially when you don't know how long they'll have. And there are many people with stage 4 cancer that have 6 months and all of these things, and you just don't know. So I would say be nice to yourself when you're first getting the news, because that's a really hard time. And I just have so much love and compassion for those people getting the news. It's so hard, especially if you're getting it now during the holidays. My second suggestion would be getting a system in place. It's hard, it's painful, especially when you just don't even want to get up in the morning, but having a group or a therapist or a friend that you have now to establish as that's going to be your person or people that you talk to about quote unquote this stuff. And it takes trial and error. Sometimes you have to try 3 therapists, and that sucks. Like, yes. So I would say, like, if you can afford it, yes, spend the money and try 3 therapists, and that sucks. And I've been doing therapy online this whole year. It's extremely powerful. I think if you have access to in person because you live next door, I don't know. It's just, I don't want to get into that, but I've been doing virtual therapy. It's really powerful. And whatever you think about therapy, establish a relationship with a therapist or someone now, so that you're not just like, oh my gosh, what do I do when things get really, really tricky, either with the diagnosis taking a turn for the worse, or God forbid you lose that person. Having that system in place now. The third thing I'll say is, I don't know, The Power of Now was a book that was really healing for me, just about being in the present moment. It's not about a religious point of view, or it doesn't even relate to grief specifically. It's just about, focusing on the moment you have now. The fourth thing I would say is there's an organization called Lantern, which you can fill out wills and stuff online, which sounds scary, but I had her on my podcast. Her name's Liz Eddy, and she's young and really accessible, and she lost her dad young, and the organization was founded when she lost her grandma actually a few years ago, and she had all this paperwork she needed to do, and it was really stressful. So she has this online system where you can just write down your person's passwords and stuff like that. Now, I know this sounds scary and might sound morbid. It's not about anticipating the loss of a person, but if they do have a terminal diagnosis specifically, I would start getting clear on some things, like if they want to be buried or cremated, where do they want their remains? How much money do they want you to spend on a funeral? Like, what is their Netflix password? What is their AT&T password and Facebook password? It sounds funny, but I've talked to a bunch of people that literally for 6 months of their lives were interrupted at work every single damn day because of drama of a password, getting into bills and trusts. So having that person write those things down might seem challenging, but I would recommend it. I'm kind of rambling, but those are some things that come to mind.
Last question before we start to wrap up, because I want to be mindful of time.
You want me to hit this?
Yeah, go ahead. You can ask it.
So do you believe?
Because I have thoughts, so I'll speak after you.
She pinged me on the side and told me to ask it, so I don't know exactly which angle she wants to go to. But do you believe in ghosts or the afterlife? And do you touch on that in any of your sessions?
Oh my gosh, I love that you asked. I've actually gotten some requests to very much go there. So I don't know, this is not the most exciting answer, but I feel like the supernatural connections, it's kind of a whole separate thing. In terms of the afterlife and what I believe, that's actually something that I'm still exploring. I'm still my opinion has changed over the years, I would say. I do think there is something afterlife. I don't think that there's just nothing, it's over forever. I don't exactly know what I think of that. I think that my dad knows, so I think he can feel something that I'm doing. I feel like there's something that he knows about my life Do I think he's like right here, right now in the interview with the glass of wine? Like, I wouldn't go that far. But I don't know. Like, I think there's something. I think that people that pass on, we can still have connections with. I believe the power of talking to them as a form of healing for you and for them. In terms of like more woo-woo spiritual stuff, I definitely want to have some mediums on the podcast because I was going
to ask you that. I was going to ask you if you would go to one.
I'm so fascinated. Just a fun story. So I haven't really gone that far yet. A fun story that I'll end on is I did speak with someone who speaks to the dead at one point, and it was through a show I was doing that I had an opportunity to speak with her for free because she's normally, wait for it, $800 an hour, which is crazy.
What?
Yeah.
People are paying that too. That's the crazy thing.
People are so paying that. So I did not specifically spend my own money on that, knock on wood, thank goodness. But she was really interesting. And she did say things, excuse me, she did say things very specific to his personality and to initials. And I actually changed my last name, fun fact. So my dad's name was Lloyd. I've been going by Chelsea Lloyd for over a decade now. So if she was to have known about me or looked me up or something, like I have a different name. So I'm like, okay, she couldn't have Googled stuff about him. And an example that she shared is I actually have, I have a cousin that unfortunately died when I was 4 and she was 9, which also is part of the inspiration for why I'm curious about all of this, but that's another story. She died in an accident, and this medium said, I feel a snowshoe and the letter S is trying to tell you something. And we don't have any of the same names. There's nothing about her. If you Google it, her name did begin with S, and she did die in an accident pertaining to snow. And it was one of the most bizarre, profound things of my life. And I don't know what people think about all of that, but that was one experience that I had that was very interesting.
I want to have a medium on too so bad. I want to see a medium. I'm trying to decide if I should go to a medium by myself first before having them on the podcast.
Maybe.
Yes, you should.
Yeah, maybe do it first by yourself. Yeah.
Or if you bring them on, I might be MIA that episode. I don't know how I feel about mediums.
What is your opinion? What is your opinion on mediums?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just.
My opinion is obviously there are people who are mediums who are not
scam artists.
Yeah, who are, or whatever. I don't know. I'm not going to judge them. Maybe they feel like they're talking to people and whatever. But I do think there are people who have that spiritual connection to those who have passed. And every time I talk about this, I reveal a little bit more, and the listeners probably think I'm crazy. But I'm not saying that I sometimes feel that, but I do feel like I do in my dreams. I've talked about this before. I have very vivid, lucid, psychotic dreams where I literally am speaking to people who are dead. And in the dream, I know that they're dead. It's not like some flashback. It's like this person is dead and they're in my dream and they shouldn't be here because there's no way we should be speaking. And yet here we are speaking. Or like my dad calls somebody's phone and they hand it to me and they're like, your dad's on the phone. And I'm like, he's dead and this can't be possible. And they're like, well, he's on the phone. And then I answer the phone in my dream and he's like telling me to go search into some place in the house and like look for shit. Like truly. And then like sometimes, this is going to really sound woo-woo, but the other day, Jared, I can't make this up. I was in my car and sometimes I get like, sometimes I feel like smells are signals from afterlife. So sometimes I get this like whiff of like the scent of my dad and it is so strong. Like I'll be in my car. Like the other day I was in my car waiting for something, like probably the dog, because you can't go in the vet anymore. You have to sit in the parking lot. And so I was just sitting in my car and I get this whiff and it is so strong. And I'm like, to the point where I physically look to my right into the empty passenger seat because I'm like, are you right there? Like, and you're not, obviously, whatever. Now I'm rambling. But like the feels of it spiritually for me, I need to do more spiritual work in general because this has been calling me for a while. But in those moments, to me, I'm like, okay, it's highly likely like he's in this car right now. Like I feel that.
Wow.
To your point about dreams, I think literally last week I had a dream and I looked at my phone in the dream. I looked at my phone and it was either a text or it was a call and it was coming from my dad's phone. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And then I woke up. And then also to bring it back to Henry, this is something I will never forget. I think I was maybe a senior because he died the summer going into my junior year. So yeah, I was a senior. We were in the junior courts. It was at night. I don't know if we were partying or if we were just outside. But I looked across the courts and I saw somebody coming out of one of the houses. And I swear to God, I was like, yo, that's Henry. And then I closed my eyes. I looked back and then the person, like, they were just gone. And I was like, that's something I would never forget. And I don't like see ghosts or anything, but I was like, that's something that just stuck with me and I just never forgot.
I don't really like the word ghost. I prefer spirits, but some people argue that it's your mind. Some people argue it's your own mind.
I can see that. Now we're going on a tangent. We're like a whole different topic.
It really is.
A whole nother hour.
It is a whole other topic. It's very interesting though.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. We're not going to spend another hour doing that. But however, we should. And if you're ever wanting to come back and talk about that with us, we would love to have you back anytime.
Totally. We'll do my podcast. We'll do a part 2. Yeah. I'm like, let's do it all.
Yeah. We'll make it happen for sure.
Is there anything you just want to share in general, like sort of like end of the pod, anything you didn't get to share today in terms of like advice or resources or just like managing grief during the holidays that you sort of want to end on?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. I just sent out a newsletter with like 30 different grief resources. So I have, I'm sure there's so many things I didn't even touch on, but I have recommendations for all kinds of groups depending on your kinds of loss. So if you email me dyingloflaughterpodcast@gmail.com, I can send those to anyone. They'll also be on my website. And then trying to think. Oh, I'm in the middle of editing and producing a video that will be out in a few days for BuzzFeed called I Lost Someone to COVID-19. And it's 6 people's stories. And they're all our age, or so they're 20s and 30s. And they each lost a mom, dad, brother, friend, grandparent, and a second one also lost their mom. And so if you have been affected by COVID and lost someone, that video will come out. And I think sometimes like BuzzFeed feels like it's this like big corporate thing, and like it is, but also it's like me and one other girl made that video. So it is very like, it's personal. Like we put a lot of time into it, these people sharing their stories. So that will be out on BuzzFeed in a few days. And I just appreciate you guys. This was fun.
No, we appreciate you. You want to share your socials so people can follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. So
plug away.
Plug away, baby. It's what we do. Dying of laugh. I have one more resource that I literally am not related to this, but I think this would just be generally helpful. Depending on when this comes out, there is a free 4-week grief course in January that Hope Edelman, who's a New York Times bestselling author and grief expert, is doing. And it's in January, and it's 4 weeks of just grief counseling and coaching and coping. And I think it'll be larger groups, so you can have your video and mic off if you're not really sure. So that is called Start Fresh Sundays. And then my socials are Dying of Laughter Podcast on Instagram. And then my personal is @_Chelsea who else. That's like Chelsea, but who else? And you can just look me up, Chelsea London Lloyd, for like stand-up comedy videos, which is related and yet unrelated, depending on your interest in that. So yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you so much again for coming on, Chelsea, despite our full 45 minutes of technical difficulties before starting the interview. This has been so much fun, and we just appreciate you being here. Another shout out to A30 for even just connecting us and helping us to meet each other and build that relationship. But you're welcome back anytime, as we said.
Yeah, I think you definitely got me to share a lot more information than anybody else has. So
yeah, that's a win right there. We cracked a closed book today, Jared.
But did you though? Hey.
But did we? Probably not.
Well, I mean, thank you guys for what you're doing with your adulting podcast and exploring all these topics that are so relatable and helpful to learn about. So that's really powerful what you guys are doing. And I love your voices and what you're offering. And I look forward to having you on my show once we put that together in early 2021. And then we can go even more, Jared, if you're open and willing.
Oh, yeah.
Story.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Anyways, thank you so much again. We appreciate it. If you guys like this episode and this podcast, scroll down, click the 5th star, and leave us a review. Also, tell a friend and tell that friend to tell a friend.
Yes, make sure you follow us on Instagram, Done with Adulting Pod. Also on Twitter, Done WTH Adulting. Like a post, leave a comment.
So we have no episode next week. We're taking a week off for the holidays, but we will be back in your ears in 2021, which is crazy to think about. Crazy to think about. And yeah, we will talk to you guys then. We hope you have a safe and fun holiday season.
Stay healthy. Just be safe out there.